In today's episode of the podcast, we are talking to Rapha, who, if you don't know him, is one of the most decorated FPS players of all time. He's been lifting trophies consistently since 2006. He has been playing at the top level for so long, and this is my second time on the podcast getting to speak with him. And it also is the first in-person episode since the relaunch. So I'm really excited about this one. I think we go through a lot of really great topics, all about performing at the elite level. And we also talk about, coaching and how to get the most out of players and some of the considerations there and so much more. This is one of my favorite conversations I've ever had on the podcast. So I really hope that you enjoy it as well. So without further delay, here's Rapha. Rapha, it's amazing that I have you on again. A lot of people really enjoyed the last time we sat down and spoke, and this time we're doing it in person, so that's even better. So thanks for coming down, and I can't wait to get this conversation started.
Yeah, Dan, it's really good to be here, especially in person. After we've had no LANs, at least for me, for the last year and a half and whatnot. So it's going to be really fun to talk about whatever today.
Yeah, and I think one place to start is that. We were off air. We were talking about coaching, and I know we're going to be talking a lot about performance and just what it's like being a professional player and the obstacles that you have to surpass. And I think we can also tie that into your future, because of course there's uncertainty cast around the Quake Pro League, which is where you're currently a professional playing and in that league, and not just playing in the league, dominating the league, of course, and. So how do you deal with this situation, with the uncertainty? How do you see your career as a professional and your future?
Well, for right now, I just know I can't really give any details, and I don't know the full details. I just know that QPO will happen again for 2022. We're on a bit of an extended break, which is actually kind of nice because I've been literally going balls to the wall for 2 years straight. Almost no really rest and break time for myself. So right now it's a really good down period for me to just kind of collect myself, step away from the game a bit, get re-energized going back into the next season. And as far as I look at it, I'm just trying to, as long as I can, perform at the highest level and I could support myself, I'm going to keep doing it until I can't anymore, because I've said it time and time again. I know once that day comes and the skill starts to drop off, that'll be it. They won't really be able to transfer to another game, etc. But for right now, I feel great as far as playing shape is concerned. My mind still feels really sharp. I'm not having any reflex drop offs or anything like that. So, and I think part of that is due to I've been doing a better job with preparing myself practice wise, diet wise, training regiment wise over the last few years. And I think that's really helped a lot. And as long as I continue to do that and even probably push further and do even better in that regard, I could probably extend my playing years for a couple years, as long as there's something that really motivates me, to keep going in that regard.
Yes, it's I've always wondered about this because myself as someone that's a competitor, and I've always felt like I will actually play something that I don't enjoy as much if the competition is higher stakes. And I know with Quake, obviously, what's really interesting is that even though it's a small pool of players, kind of similar to those who maybe half of the people who are listening were born after Painkiller, but at the same time, Painkiller was like this. There's this very small circuit of players, but the competition is extremely competitive. Yes. So that I think is obviously saving grace there. And I think Quake, it does seem the same. As me when I'm watching, I'm seeing that the level is improving. There's a lot of people taking it very, very seriously. So the competition seems to be there. But have you considered? For example, dipping your toes into other things such as, Valorant would be the obvious thing to suggest. And it's something that I feel like you have a unique value proposition insofar as your history as a Quake player makes you stand out above. It's not just you're a pro Quake player, you're Rapha, you have such a strong reputation. So I feel like this is something you have to have thought about, right?
Yeah, I did when Valorant was coming out. There were rumors of Riot, releasing a hero-based shooting game. But then it ended up being, a tactical shooter like Counter-Strike. And the difference for me, I've appreciated Counter-Strike from afar throughout my career. I don't get to watch it all the time, but when I do, the competition, as far as like the high-end tournaments, is really entertaining to watch from time to time. But as far as playing for me, I think it's just been a little too slow to kind of like get me to get fully driven into it. Whereas Quake just has that, like, it scratches that itch. You know what I mean? Like the movement style in Quake is like none other. And I think that's what really sets it apart as far as a shooter. You can really express your personality into the game, whether it's playing in duel or a team-based mode, a lot more in that game compared to others. And I think just, how do I put this? It's not as though I would be against playing a tactical shooter. I just think right now with the opportunity to continue my legacy with Quake and that's been there, that's why I've stuck with it. If that had, gone away a year before or something like that, I probably would have made the switch and went all in. As long as somebody was willing to, invest in me and know that, like, give me some sort of salary that I can definitely support myself, and the belief that I'm going to be able to get there, because I would put in the work essentially. But as of right now, I'm fine just like watching it from time to time. I haven't really followed the meta too closely, but that is something that I think intrigues me, like watching Valorant more than Counter-Strike is. I really like the adaptation of adding heroes and classes and whatnot to the tactical genre. I think it brings a lot of depth to the game. But yeah, so for now, as far as playing, I haven't really thought about that. But in the future, like, once my playing career is done, I'll probably move towards something in terms of, casting a game, because I think I do a pretty good job of being like, not the play-by-play, but the color commentator. So as long as I can, really study up on a game and I think it fits the way that I think and I can explain it in a good layman's terms to people and bring it across that way, I'd be really excited to do it. Or something other than that is potentially coaching, just bring my, strategy and expertise and like preparing, because even though the FPS styles are different, there are a lot of similarities that you can bring to each one as far as preparation, the fundamentals of FPS, as far as proper positioning, proper execution, things like that, what you should be looking for, how to like get a feel for your opponent and get in their mind, like get a feeling for what they want to do before you want to do it. And that's the biggest thing in FPS, I think, is being the one to impose your will. And that doesn't always mean being super aggressive, but it just means always finding a way to be a step ahead of the opponent.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, I have to go back very quickly and pick out one thing that you said, sure, or maybe the order that you said it. You said casting, then you said coaching, and it's interesting because coaching seems like would be the natural first thing that would come to your mind in terms of what you're familiar with. Casting, being on the broadcast and explaining it to, as you said, the layman, as opposed to players, and being within a team structure, definitely seems like it's further from, not to make a judgment on your comfort zones, but what you're used to. And so with casting, is that something that you have thought about quite a lot, or is it just feels like just a natural progression?
I think either one kind of feels like a natural progression. It just kind of depends on what opportunities arrive at the time. And I've thought about it a lot. As far as the coaching thing is concerned, I actually don't think that my expertise would be, you think about like normal head coaches for sports programs and whatnot, and they kind of like dictate everything within the team. I don't really think that that's where esports is at the moment. I think there's a big disconnect for a few reasons between why coaching is effective or non-effective, and what players really do well that coaches aren't understanding how to bring it to the game. And from my experience, like playing different team modes in Quake, in Overwatch, in other games, most of the top players know what they're doing. They don't necessarily need to be instructed and told, what to do, as if the coach has to make all the decisions. And plus, it's a little difficult to implement that as a coach because most games don't allow you to. Like, you're not allowed during the game to communicate to your team. It's all up to them. So I think it's all about finding a way to structure an environment where they have the confidence to take their abilities and to adapt mid-game. And I think the biggest thing is the problems that you see within teams and drama is that players don't know the best way to bring up shortcomings of other players without offending their egos, or just straight up being rude and disrespectful and calling it out in bad times. They don't always have the best social skills to be able to do that. And I think that's where a coach really can provide a lot of value to a team, is being able to single out certain issues with certain players and then structuring how to improve that and go to that person individually rather than, calling individual aspects out compared to team things in the team environments, taking people aside, giving them work programs to be able to get through those issues and see progress and make them a better teammate. I think that's where in the next 10 years we'll see a big step forward. And I think that's what I would be better at, is being more of like, I wouldn't say necessarily a head coach, but like an individual's coach, and just being able to find the necessary things that each player needs to be able to improve and to go forward, and how to like kind of implement that and give them ways to improve on that. And if they don't take that to heart and they don't, that's up to them. You know what I mean? But I think at the end of the day, like all these top players, I know for myself, I want to win. Like I hate losing. It's not to the point where I'm a crybaby or anything about it, but it's like we're all in it to win. And if you're not in it to get to the top, then you need to step aside for somebody else.
Yeah, it's the coaching thing is such an interesting one because there is no standard that exists, and it doesn't seem like there is enough stock taken and enough checks and balances when it comes to the leadership in teams, that because it's almost like it's always like a step removed. Like you'll have the players, then you'll have the coach, and then you'll have the GM, and that's supposed to be quite connected, and the GM obviously kind of filters through to the upper leadership, and that's kind of, there's this structure that exists, but the issues always seem to be the case that, like what you're describing, where the players get to a point where they feel like they're having issues in the results that they're getting because they want to win, like you say. And so then because either the coach is not doing their job, or because there's no natural like leader of men on the team, or because the GM is not able to actually be able to resolve issues within the roster, and usually it's going to be the GM that's the person that with the coach is usually trying to highlight what should be a roster change or should not be a roster change, these kinds of things. Sometimes the players like just they feel like they have to take control of the situation, and then as you say, like because they're not really equipped to do that, because the structures that exist don't really support that kind of approach, it ends up with backstabbing or people saying stuff behind people's backs, players getting siloed, and it just, that stuff obviously like is horrendous because now the entire team's performance is impacted. But I've seen this so commonly amongst like so many top teams. It's actually kind of insane, and it seems like this whole process could be sort of revolutionized. So I definitely love that we're having this conversation, because I think these conversations have to be happening more, and I think teams have to be like the team owners or the people that are kind of in the upper parts of the structure need to have a better sense of who they are putting in these GM roles, who they're putting in these coaching roles, because sometimes, because a coach, as you say, ultimately is about enhancing the performance of the team overall, and that could mean a bunch of different things. It could be the mental game, or just like as you mentioned, like the social intelligence aspect, how the players communicate to each other and optimizing that, or it could be the strategy and the tactics, or there's so many different things, like the fitness, as you were talking about, like getting on top of your nutrition and your diet and your habits. There's so much, and that we don't have, I think, a lot of coaches in esports currently that are able to actually tie a lot of those things into a more holistic approach, or even have the sense of those things to recognize which player needs what. And so it is super underdeveloped. So, I mean, it's exciting, but also kind of tragic in a sense. And so I definitely think that you would do an excellent job at that. And I think also as a caster, what I think would be interesting is, I mean, would you consider casting Valorant? Let's just throw that out there, because Quake, obviously, it's if you're not able to be a professional Quake player, it's likely that you won't be able to be a professional broadcaster in Quake as well.
Yeah, for that, I think if I were to move into that route, I would probably not do it for let's say Quake ended and I wanted to move into casting Valorant. I wouldn't even attempt it for probably the first 6 months. I would really dive deep into the game, try to improve my own skill. I know I don't necessarily have to reach the level that the very top players are at, but I have to reach the level where I understand what they're thinking, why they're doing what they're doing. As long as I could do that, and then, and I'm constantly involved with the game, especially with adding new heroes constantly, and the meta potentially changing on why picks are good on this map, etc., and being able to break that down for people, yes, I could potentially do that. But I wouldn't, just be like, yeah, let me do it right away. I think that's very naive, because I take pride in knowing what I'm talking about. If I don't, then I don't want to talk about it. You know what I mean? I just don't want to shoot smoke out my ass in that in that regard. You know what I mean? But No, it's not. It's not that it's a game that I'd be against doing. It's just I want to do it right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's actually really interesting because I've been surprised a lot by Valorant in the sense that initially, you know, CS:GO is a game which is, it's kind of like Quake in the way that it feels so heavily about these fundamentals. You have you have like a physics system, and you have just different types of weapons and some resources, and then it just comes down to the fundamental principles of just your ability to have good mechanics and mouse control and all of that movement, and then your ability to make good decisions around these fundamental principle like elements to the game. And Counter-Strike feels quite similar to that in that sense. And Valorant is no different, as you say. All those things apply in Valorant. But in Valorant, at the same time, because there are all of these abilities and there is more intensity, there's less time, there's less rounds. Every single ability is much more markedly important. Like it's a very easy signal to describe or to talk about during a match, and like it feels like everything is important. And it's not to say that in Quake or CS it's not, but in Quake or CS, the really important things are like these the kind of mastery and the fundamentals. It's harder to kind of like pick those things out and show that to the audience.
Yeah, because it's happening at a faster rate. I think that's why a lot of people like Counter-Strike and Valorant from a spectator point of view, because you can tell, like, and you could kind of feel that, you know, that energetic feeling when the pressure starts to add, and like when something, like you're explaining, like a certain ability really makes an impact. I think it's like at the speed that's necessary for it to be easier for a caster to break down, because I know from like your knowledge of Quake, you can definitely break down. I've seen you do it, you know, for matches as far as like reviewing a VOD and what you've done, you know, the difference between that and casting it live. Like, you know exactly what you're talking about, you know, how it should be portrayed. But sometimes it's just happening so fast, you don't have enough time to be able to, you know, speak it into existence. So, you know, and whereas I think the downtime that's there for Valorant or for Counter-Strike in between rounds, or just like, you know, certain big play happens, but you know, like as the time is winding down towards like the diffuse and whatnot, it gives you that little bit of extra time to build that up and then just let it play out, you know. And I think that's something that is a bit more difficult to come across with Quake from that perspective, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are a lot of things that, like, you're mentioning that I see stuff and I'm like, the thing will like cite me a lot, and I'm like, I can't. This is like and it will be like the player like stopped like for like a millisecond or something in their movement to like on the peak or something like that. There's like a way that they'll outplay an opponent in the sense of the expected timing for their peak, and so they'll basically get a small edge in like the crosshair placement or something like that. Like, you know, we as players, like, you see these things pretty commonly, but like you can't, as you say, like on broadcast, you really have to pick and choose, and you have to go a bit higher level with what you're pointing out. And as you say, like those minute details are for the are for VOD reviews. However, there is also, much like I think in the coaching world, there is the language is something hasn't necessarily been decided upon, or it's not necessarily been developed in a sense that I think could aid our ability to communicate some of the really cool things that are happening. You know, for example, I remember in Counter-Strike, I used to end up quite often pointing out like just small elements and like the micro aspects of like a fight, like a one-on-one, where like a player will basically like they'll almost like over peak something so that they go into like a very unexpected off angle, which is something whereby if you do that against worse players and play, you know, in a kind of objectively suboptimal way, that's not what you should be doing. But against the actual elite level, it's like, oh, this is so cool because they're playing against what they know to be the expected play. This is like what you were saying, the mind games that are happening, and that's the most interesting thing. You have the two best like teams or players in the world, and they're trying to be better than each other, and they have to do loads of crazy shit to do that. And so that's what I want to hear about. And it's a challenge sometimes to do that when you don't have, like, there's no established language behind some of these ideas. So I think if you stepped into casting, I think it'd be really cool, because I think that you'd bring a perspective to it that is generally lacking, because it's also about the competitive angle as to like what's actually happening when someone is on or off of their performance at that level, and like speaking to those ideas as to actually being in the chair, because you've been in the chair so many times yourself on the stage, and we don't have that level of experience in casting, really, I would say. And I think in Valorant there is there is a hole for color casters right now, especially in North America. So if you end up doing that, I think there is definitely a space for you, even though there's lots of casting going on right now. So I hope to see that. But with that said, with the coaching stuff we're talking about, what has been sort of the most? Have you ever been coached yourself? Like, I mean, I know that Team Liquid has, of course, people like Jared Tendler, who's there, who helps some of the teams out. I don't know who he helps exactly besides the CS team, but have you ever received coaching of any kind?
In Overwatch, we had a few coaches, and I think at the level that game was at the time, I don't think that coaches were as beneficial as they could be, and it's not necessarily to their fault. I think it's just the way the game was evolving, and just the knowledge that's needed in a game that's 6v6 with 3 to 4 abilities minimum each character. And what the difficult thing for coaches, I think, is breaking down in simple terms not just all the things that happen, because you can always look at, like, you lost this fight or you lost this game because of all these factors. The biggest thing is picking out what is the one thing that you can all fix right now. These are like the mistakes that you're making consistently. What is the difference between the mistakes you made that are one-offs in that situation, or no, this is a repeating error, and how do we as a team come to fix this? Is this something that as a team we're messing up with because of miscommunication, bad play calling, just not knowing proper hero matchups well enough, etc. So you need to spend more time doing that, or is it like individual problems? I think that's a big thing that was missing, and I wish that we had a bit better coaching back then. But it was kind of, that's the general sentiment within the scene at the time, was like the best players who were the best shot callers, they would have been the best coaches, but there's not enough time. There's definitely not enough time to do that. I remember I felt like we weren't getting enough VOD review in, and when I made the switch from flex to support, so I was having to learn a whole new position. Mostly was having to play Lucio, but was trying to spend the time outside of scrims, like, to get better at the other ones, just in case the meta changed, or in case there's some random time that time to hang was our other support. What happens if he's sick and we have to use a sub and I need to do that? So, like, trying to, like, increase my level at that time, and then not only fixing my own problems, but trying to be a help to the team, since I was the shot caller, and, like, trying to VOD review, because I felt like that's something I've always done really well in Quake, and that's what has kind of, like, helped catapult me, like, in the early days, to where being able to compete at the top and give myself a chance to be the best. It was doing a good job of breaking down the differences between myself and the other top players, and the things that I could change that were within my control, and other things that it's understanding, like, okay, in their skill set, they can do this, but I can't. So knowing the limitations of the goals that I'm setting, and being realistic about it. Because if you're setting too many goals at once, you're not going to complete them. It feels overwhelming. It's just like life. It's like, if you try to fix too many things in your life at once, you're just going to collapse, because you feel way too overwhelmed by it. And I think that's something that, like, in the next, like, 5 to 10 years, there will be a few individuals who will be really good at that, and they'll be able to actually impart it onto a team. And going back to why I think, part of the struggle is with, coaches across games at the moment is, if you look at growing up, like, what sports did you play growing up?
Football, basketball.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those all have a super set structure of coaching and what you're supposed to do, team fundamentals, from a very young age. Like, really young, especially here in America. Like, when it comes to football, basketball, baseball, you're already starting to be institutionalized within the sports world when you're 5 years old. Whereas in esports, you don't have that structure at all. Like, so then you have this weird mix of players, like myself. I loved playing sports growing up. So I have that kind of background and way to kind of, like, bridge the gap, and, like, how to improve myself from there into gaming. And then there are other players who, they've never played sports or been in that kind of structure whatsoever. So grasping certain aspects for them is a little bit more difficult, because they haven't been brought up that way. And then, they might be a lot better at fixing themselves in certain regards because they haven't been in that structure, but they struggle, let's say, with the team aspect. And so then they get frustrated with the other players who are much better with the team aspect but don't improve themselves on themselves, so they feel this weight of, it's all on me. You know what I mean? Like, they have this weight, like, why are you not pulling your weight? But they don't understand the big picture, and that's where that comes into, bridging the gap between players that understand the big picture and players that don't, and how to get the most out of them. Because I'd say one of the best players I've ever played with in terms of understanding and being creative and being able to make magic happen, but being willing to talk and to understand the big picture, has been Waz. I think Waz is an untapped talent due to whether it's his own fault for not getting into certain games or whatever. I think he is a phenomenal team player, and he's one of those players where he can think and be very reactive in the moment and very creative. But I think he's best led by somebody who understands the big picture, and then when it's all in together, he's just dynamite. And I think finding players like that across different games, it's difficult, but when you do and you get them in a structure, like going forward, I think we'll see some of the best esports like performers. We're still yet to see them, is what I think. It's like once it comes down to that proper structure, you're going to bring the best out of people.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I mean, again, that's why it's like really exciting. There's so many parts of being involved in esports that are exciting because, well, for equal parts exciting and equal parts frustrating, because it's like you're at this point where to see so much growth and potential and evolution, you have to be in a place that's fairly unevolved in many respects, and deal with that. But it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and I've always felt like this when I look at Counter-Strike rosters or Valorant rosters, just these teams in these very complex games, where it's pretty impossible for players themselves in a large extent on average to have the ability to see the bigger picture, really, because they have to be so focused on what they're good at because they have a role within a system. So it's not necessarily their job to really understand the system per se. That's really supposed to be down to the in-game leader, and that is a harder skill set too. That's just kind of there is a lot of like yin and yang in that sense, whereby it's like the micro and the macro. Like, you have to not just be able to understand how to make the play within the micro, but you also have to have that feeling or that game sense as to how that impacts the game at a macro level. And again, a lot of players, they generate this understanding through just gaining experience, and that's what trains their sort of expert intuition as they get the reps and see their brain sees all the patterns as they play. But to be able to sort of do what you were talking about, which is to actually be able to break these things down by like looking at VODs and improving that way. There are a lot of players that don't really tap into that, or maybe don't have the natural skill sets to do it to the impact that you have done. And lots of people do say, okay, watch VODs. And, for someone like me, I've been doing that for a long time, so I kind of have my own system as to how I get value from that. But I'm really curious to understand for you how you leverage that the most in terms of improving your game. And the reason why I think this is particularly interesting in your case is that Quake is such a fast game that it feels like everything that you're doing has to be intuitive decision making. Whereas in a game like tactical FPS, you have breaks between rounds, you die, there's time off, you have a spot where like you will reset in the round and you get to talk to your teammates, and you can actively make decisions that are kind of less just baked into your intuition. Obviously you have a sense that this is a good decision, but Quake, it's actually like there's no time to really think. So how do you transfer like the idea of looking at a VOD, breaking down fundamentals, see that there is some like error in the code of your intuition, and then fix that? How do you do that process? I
think the biggest area that I was able to apply that was when Sacrifice was the main team mode for Quake Champions at the beginning, because in my opinion, that team mode and the speed at which it's played from a playing perspective has been the best esports mode to play. It involves everything. Like, it is so high paced. You have to be on edge all the time. You have to constantly be thinking forward, but communicating with your team. And it's probably been the best feeling of your individual impact matters a lot. Like, you can carry a game, but you can also be the reason why your team fails. And I think the biggest thing and the reason why we went from we had a few roster changes due to I remember we started QuakeCon 2017 and it was wins to hang myself and ID, and then ID wanted to step away from playing like after that event, and so then we ended up picking up Waz, and then we had to use KGB instead of Wins for one event because of I think it was like visa issues, or Wins was like moving or something like that, or he might have still had some Overwatch stuff at the time, but to try to improve and go from QuakeCon and finishing third, fourth to being the team that can win the next two big events, what I needed to look out for in that game and that mode were just small things that we can all be on the same page about. Because a lot of it is about you have to trust your players to intuitively make the right decisions in combat, what type of combat is okay and what's not, like understanding when you're being baited into certain fights or you're chasing too much, etc., things like that. And it's about finding those the first is finding mistakes with the team. And a lot of that comes down to, okay, this situation has happened like 3 to 4 times in the last week and it's cost us in scrims, etc. So how can we together prevent this from happening, or at least mitigate the loss? And a lot of it just comes down to communication. It comes down to consistently one player that had the opportunity to speak up early enough didn't speak up early enough. So then it's like, okay, is the player just not talking enough, or do we need to just come up with a simple term, like a simple 1 or 2 syllable based term that it's like a new language for us? So it's all coming up with a new communication language to just get that information across as fast as possible. And that was something I was really good at, and figuring out, okay, this situation's happened a lot, so we need to come up with a name for this specific area, or when this situation happens, this is the call. This is the call that we make. We all know to react instantly then, and it just literally once you get another scrim or two and you've implemented a couple of those things, you can feel the difference. Like as soon as everybody's clicking on the same page with like new communication calls or a new understanding of how to react to certain actions from another team, it changes night and day. And then it's like, it's not a problem anymore. But it's about being able to find those mistakes. So that's the first step from a team perspective. And then it's trying to figure out the little idiosyncrasies between each other on what you're doing on an individual basis that's wrong. So it's like, okay, well, this what you're doing you think is right, but in the long run in positive EV and negative EV, it's negatively affecting the team. Like it may work out for you this time, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to hurt us in the long run because you're not going to be in position for the next 20 seconds. Like that's going to help us, or like the damage that you did in this area helped you, but if you were here helping the team when this call was made, we all would have made the play successfully, but you not being there was a huge failure, that type of thing. So it's trying to find like the little patterns that we're all, and I was guilty of it too. So it's about like, I was just looking for everything that's from each player, and then we would make a list. Be like, look, this is what we're working on as a team this week, and this is what we're working on individually. And then it's just going from there and understanding like, and I think we all, regardless of who it was, whether it was with ID at the beginning, with KGB when he filled in for Wins, and then for Wins when he came back for us for DreamHack Winter 2017, all players understood at the end of the day, we're trying to be the best that we can and bring the best out of each other. When we're bringing anything up, you have to really be careful with how you bring stuff up to teammates. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is understanding how to control their emotions when they speak to people. There's times in game where you need to be emotional, and the call that you are seeing is the most important, and that just comes instinctively by playing. And you'll know that at that moment, you need to be the one that puts more emotion and emphasis in your voice. And then there's a difference between when the game is done and you're trying to improve in between matches, practice, you're trying to adapt. You have to really be mindful of the emotional state of your team. Like not everybody is as mentally strong as you. Not everybody responds in the same way. So you kind of like have to learn how to speak to each other and what is the best way to get the most out of everyone. So yeah, I think like Wins, for example, he's been one of the most accomplished players like in the history across multiple team games, even duel in certain modes, in UT and in Quake 4. He had some good success as well. But I think the biggest thing for him is he's willing to adapt. He's very French. He believes in himself a lot and what he's doing. But if he is presented with evidence in the right way and the right manner, it may take a little bit, but he at least like questions himself. And if he realizes, no, this is the way that it needs to be done, he makes that sacrifice. And that's why he's always been successful. Even though it's like a very big balance between the ego of believing in yourself, but being willing to change. And you have to be willing to and humble enough to understand that somebody else's point of view at times is going to be better than your own. And you have to change yourself for the better of the team.
It's I think that whole process has always been one of the most rewarding things for me personally in team games as well. Just seeing, because it's like, because I've played Duel as well, and I don't know, Duel can be lonely.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you.
All of the responsibility is on you.
That's it. And I actually have to, I have a quick point about that I was thinking about as you were talking too, because Duel, playing a 1 versus 1 game versus a team game, when we talk about pressure and so on, like, I don't know how it is for most people, but I feel like it's fairly consistent that when you play a 1 versus 1 game, the feeling, the sense of pressure is magnified by like tenfold. It feels, because every single kind of just mistake, you feel it more because there's nobody else to turn to. You're not in the only system you're in is a system that is entirely you. So you have to take responsibility for every single failure and adjust and deal with the fact that if you make a mistake or underperform, that is, you have to bounce back mentally, and there's no one's going to pick you up. There's nobody there who's going to energize you, and you don't get a breather. There's no break. There's no rest. It's just you. And I've never felt like the same levels of pressure and stress as I have when playing Duel. So firstly, how was that experience for you in terms of managing that? What do you think were the biggest obstacles for you in growing your mental strength in that regard? And if that is the same experience for you? And then secondly, the next question would be, how have all of those lessons benefited you in a team environment?
I think the hardest thing when it comes to Duel is understanding that, like you said, it's all you. Like if you're losing, 99% of the time it's your fault. It's mostly not to luck. It's like you could have put yourself in a better position. You should have chose the right weapon. You forgot the item timing, etc.
Especially in Quake, where there's like the least variance of any game that exists. So there's like nothing there. There's no spin you can put on it. It's like it is just your fault.
Yeah, and you have to be your best friend. Like, not to the point where you're delusional, but you have to be able to pick yourself up. It's something that I was able to do well, and I think it was because the starting of doing all the VOD reviewing, because I looked at, when growing up, I loved watching football, and a big idol of mine was Peyton Manning, and what set him apart from so many other quarterbacks and what was changing, I think, the NFL at the time was his just commitment to VOD review so that he could understand his opponent and being able to adapt on the fly. And I felt like I really needed and could apply that to Quake. I watched the pros at the time, Cooler, 04, CZM, Lexer, even Fatality was a bit before my time. But for those when I was starting to try to get good, I thought, the world of them. But I also saw that I think they can play even better. There is another level that like is untapped in consistency that they're not reaching, that I think I can reach. And so a lot of that through VOD review, I think, helped me when going into games and matches, and just as I slowly, played in more tournaments and got more like experience in that regard of handling pressure, just understanding and believing in yourself, like knowing your limits and just trusting that game plan. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is they end up having points of indecision. Where you get stuck like deciding something and then you don't make a good decision or a bad decision. So it just leads to an even worse one because you're not like constantly staying within the flow of the game. And it's just at the end of the day, when you've lost, what do you want to get from it? Do you want to sit there and feel sorry for yourself and complain and just be a sore loser in a sense? Or do you want to take something from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again? Because at the end of the day, everybody can be the best in the world at feeling sorry for themselves. But feeling sorry for yourself doesn't help you improve. And I think that's the best thing that you can do for yourself, is just like, it's okay. It is okay to fail. Like, as long as you've put everything out there, it's all right to fail. It's totally fine. You can always be able to pick yourself up and learn something from it and become a better person, a better player, etc. going forward. But if you're not giving that effort for yourself at the end of the day, whether it's duel, team mode, anything, you're just selling yourself short. And that's the biggest thing that you can get across. Because I think that's, a lot of people ask me, like, how do I deal with nerves? I feel really nervous when I play. I was like, well, I used to feel really nervous too. Like, everybody has to go through it. Like, it's something that you learn. Your body and your mind, you have to learn how to manage the adrenaline. A lot of it deals with breathing. I've noticed a lot of people, like, think about it when you shoot a free throw in basketball. What do you typically do right before you shoot? You hold your breath, and then you exhale and release, because it's an intense moment. You want to be focused for it. Well, in Quake and Counter-Strike, those intense moments don't last 1 second. Sometimes there's like an extended like situation that's going on for 30 seconds. And people don't realize they've been holding their breath the entire time. They're not taking a second to breathe. And so since they're not breathing properly, you know, they're not getting enough oxygen in their body, and their hands start shaking more because it's getting more and more intense. And then instead of just taking a second, they realize they finally have a time and taking a deep breath or two. You know, people are like trying to catch up too much. And so then their breathing is too fast. And so it's about being mindful and in the moment. And being present is a huge, huge thing as far as competing is concerned. And yeah, I kind of don't know how to segue that now into the team aspect.
Oh, it's okay. You know, I can just jump on that. I mean, you said a lot of really cool things. I mean, the thing about I just realized when you said that you just don't breathe for long periods of time, like you have sleep apnea or something. Mm-hmm. It's like, actually, that is really consistent with my experience now that I think about it, because there's all these moments in intensity where you're so very focused on one thing that you kind of forget about everything else stops. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's not necessarily a good thing. And it's interesting that you kind of raise this point too, because I know, for example, like one of the things that Tendler says in his latest book is he has this really great way of describing how like the nerves are like really awesome. It actually allows you to perform at a better level, because it creates, like the nerves and the adrenaline and everything, it creates like a situation where your body is, again, I don't know the terms in like biology, but like everything is kind of at a higher sensitivity than it would normally be because of that. And so it's about like the management of that state. And for some people, what happens is they'll get into a spot whereby if they have like mental game leaks, that's when, you know, it can spiral out of control pretty quickly, because you may feel like, oh, I'm like shaking and I'm nervous. So then if you have like other mental game leaks, that let's say you're afraid to lose, or you really feel like you need to lose, or you feel like you're underperforming and you don't know what to do about it, like these kinds of thoughts that can come into your mind, now all of a sudden you're going to start to like, that shaking really translates into, oh, I'm nervous. And now you have that secondary emotion of like you consciously recognize that you're nervous now. So it's like all these things are happening in your mind in that moment, where you're talking about like the physiological kind of control, and then there's the mental control, and then there's this sense as well that if you don't have the awareness to even know these things are happening in the first place, because you're so focused on that one thing, then now you don't even have the ability to know what was going wrong in those moments. And I think that you're talking about the awareness. I think it's really interesting, because it's really easy to say to people, oh, you should just be aware. And it's like, actually that awareness requires practice.
It does.
And
yes.
That's something that I learned actually in Diabotical. I'd been playing for a long time and always interested in these ideas. And in Diabotical was the first time when I was really trying to focus on awareness, when I'd like come back to doing some competition, and I realized that I had this leak whereby in really hard matches, I would have this tendency to feel like there's a certain point where I'm actually afraid to keep performing at my best, which sounds ridiculous, but the way that our mental game works is unpredictable. Like, you know, it doesn't make sense a lot of the time. We have to kind of go in there and figure it out. But once I was aware of like even how I was feeling when I was having my like A game performance. Now all of a sudden, because I have the awareness, it's not throwing me off of my A game because I'm just aware of what's happening, but it's actually because what used to happen is I would be aware of it, and then my awareness would be like, oh shit, I'm playing really well. I want to keep playing well. And I get nervous because I'm like, what if I stop playing really well? And like I have all these stupid thoughts. So, but just having the awareness to then know what's happening in those moments, but also be able to refer back to that feeling to then be like, oh, I'm in my A game right now. Okay, now I have some protocols for any pitfalls I might have and how to handle those as they crop up, or to understand the kinds of things that will take me out of my A game that will happen in the game. Because, for example, sometimes, like you were saying before, sometimes there are things that are outside of your control, and you may have this kind of illusion of control where it's like, oh, I should have been able to have a better result here. But in reality, there are certain spots where you have to accept that this wasn't on you. And that's like having you need the awareness first, and it requires so much practice to get there. And I feel like I came into that way too late to get the benefits from it. Do you have any like, I mean, I just threw a lot out there of like kind of my regurgitation of like these ideas. What do you think in terms of like practicing that awareness? Like how would you guide someone to do that if they aren't already doing it?
I mean, like you said, even for myself, the understanding of, how to deal with nerves and things like that, and the breathing thing, it's something that I noticed and I was conscious of it. And so it's like, oh, this is actually causing a problem. So I need to practice against players that are very good so that it brings that out. Because if you're practicing against, there's benefits to practicing all sorts of ranges, from amateur players to right under the top and then at the very elite. You can gain different things from them. But as far as like channeling and dealing with playing under pressure, you won't get that from the bottom two. You'll get it from playing the elite. And that's when you're like, okay, once you're in the next time you're in that situation, just be more conscious of it and do the best thing that you can to try to eliminate it. And it's going to take some time, like especially with like the breathing thing. Once you're conscious of it, you just slowly start to like deal with it. And then how are you feeling in the moment as you're going with it? And the best thing is to just keep problem solving. As long as you're not letting your mind kind of like race elsewhere or get fixated on one thing, and you're constantly trying to, what is the next issue? How do I solve it? What do I need to do right now to lead to this? And that's something that really helped me with 0-4. Like I already had, a lot of good habits in place, but I think just the reminder from him and like grilling it into my head, like, hey, once you get in the big pressure games, just keep problem solving, no matter what's going on. Like, even if the game seems out of reach, keep problem solving. Like, don't give up on yourself. You don't know, like the greatest comebacks happen because somebody starts messing up. And as long as you like keep problem solving, stay in the moment, give yourself a chance, as long as you're keeping yourself in there, that's what you need to do. And then let me try to think of another example that could be like, because breathing is pretty easy. Once you start noticing yourself doing that, that should be something over like a week or two you should be able to master, right? And that'll happen in any game. It's just all about dealing with pressure. Okay, this one you and I can relate to a lot. Communication. And something that happens in team games a lot is players get so focused on combat that they freeze up and they stop talking. And that's been something for me that I made sure that I only asked from my teammates what I knew I could do of myself. Just the way, like, if you've watched The Last Dance, essentially what Michael Jordan would ask, he wouldn't ask anything from his teammates that he wouldn't put himself through. And the biggest issue that a lot of team players have is they don't understand the big picture of the small drop in your mechanics and your accuracy in the damage that you're going to do is going to be made up from your teammates. And some of that, I think, goes back to not being in that structure of being able to rely on others to help you succeed. And so it is very, very painful to watch a team and you see a big moment and you watch the one player who literally is fighting in the most important situation and they're saying nothing. Just nothing. They're just focusing on fighting the whole time. When if they would have spoken up and just missed one bullet because of it, or whatever, like maybe died a half second earlier, but their teammates could have reacted instantly and made up for that lack of it. Like
This is me, by the way.
information is so key. It is like, it's free, it's there, as long as you understand the proper ways of doing it in short, small intervals, and then understanding when your voice is important and when it's not in the team aspect, which that just comes from time with scrimming and playing matches. But as long as everybody understands that and is committed to that, you essentially give yourself a wall hack for your team. Like the information, if you're putting it out there properly, you can see where the enemy is in your head. You have that advantage. If you're communicating better than them, you're going to have more opportunities in games where you're going to have the advantage on the peaks. You're going to be able to get more entry frags. You're going to be able to be the one that gets, okay, we have 30 seconds to come up and enter this area. This is where they're likely going to be. So we're going to go with plan A instead of plan C. And then we're going to all attack in this vector, and then you come out successful. But if the person doesn't give the information fast enough, then you, as the shot caller or the backup caller, can't make up those plans because you just have lack of information. And I think that's something that is easy to understand. If you're in a fight for like 2 to 5 seconds and you said nothing to your team, I fucked up. You can easily understand that, and you start to like make a mark of it, how many times you start doing it, and then you subconsciously are like, I'm not going to do that this time. And then you slowly force yourself, and it's painful at first. It is, because you're battling with your own ego on how to output the most of your damage, of your situations, of your kills, and you are going to suffer on your own personal level for a little bit while you're trying to improve yourself with communication and trying to focus on everything that's going on and your mechanics and speaking at the same time. It's a lot to do at once, but it takes like 2 to 4 weeks of constantly, every time you notice that, you start putting it into motion. You start speaking it into existence. You start sacrificing your own play for the benefit of your team. And eventually it becomes second nature. It's the same with timing in Quake. Players at the beginning in Duel struggle with timing typically. They're normally really good they get good at the mechanics first, but then they have lapses in timing the items, where it's like the more that you force yourself to consciously think about those things, the easier it becomes, and the more that like it's just instinctual. Like for me at my level, when it comes to item timing, it's one of the most mind-grinding things to do, to time everything at once. But it's like you set up a simple system for yourself to, like you said, checks and balances. Like if I falter here, how do I get it back? How do I get back to the level that I need to? So for our example is you need to know first the order in which every item comes up, even if it's not in an easy, simple pattern order to understand. You remember the order, then you remember the major item timings. And then once you have that grasp again, then you start timing the lights as well. You get a third one. Then, okay, now I want to time all 4 at the same time. And you're just trying to push yourself to your limit to do it as long as you can. The longer that you can do that, the more successful that you'll be. In team games, the more that you communicate properly in those situations, in those big matches, the more successful your team will be. It's just growing pains, and I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with the growing pains because it's not their comfort zone. It's not what they're good at. And I think that's something where you have coaches in scrims, if they're the ones that can point that out during the scrims right away and just keep on top of people for doing that, it would really help. Having somebody other than you and your teammates to be able to point that out time and time again and get you into the habit of doing it, and then you don't need to rely on them anymore either. It's just, I think it could help speed up the process.
Definitely.
And because like I said, it took a while for me, but I knew of its importance, and because that's the thing, I'm not like Claus was. I'm not this, young kid that can just go around hitting everything. That's not the way that I'm going to be able to win. Like, I have to be able to win by knowing what you're doing all of the time and being able to make those decisions faster to mitigate the greatness of your aim. I have to be able to be in better positions, better fights all the time, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to win. And I think that's partly why I pushed myself to do that, even before Quake Champions, like trying to do it in Quake Live with CTF and TDM and whatnot. I just think it's an invaluable skill that needs to be grilled into everybody's mind for team games. Counter-Strike, Dota, League, Valorant, whatever it is, it is so important. And if it's not being addressed, that's a failure on like not just the players but the organization, the coach, everything. It's one of the most key things that you can do that's within your control to be successful.
I was just about to say, because you can kind of bucket it into two plays. Well, I mean, I guess there's multiple ways you can look at it, but ultimately it's about there is something there that is the opponent can't do anything to take away your ability to communicate. Only you can take that away, and it's something that you can enhance. It's like, I mean, it's quite funny actually, because of course, like in Diabolical, this is a huge failure of mine. And one of the tragic parts about it is that once it was raised, I put like a system in place. Like every day I would spend like a couple hours. I broke it up a little bit, like 1 hour at the beginning of the day and 1 hour later on. Or I'd run around like FFA or warm-ups, just calling constantly whilst I was fighting to like try to solve this. And the really sad thing about it is that then Diabolical died, so I never really got to see the kind of fruits of my labor. But for me it was interesting because like one of the reasons why I always love competing is because the hard work never feels like hard work, because it's motivated by the sense of like wanting to win for myself, for my team, to see the growth and the progress. And with something like the communication is quite an exciting one, in the sense that, again, it's like it's something that you can just put a system in place whereby like no one can mess with that in the game. So it's like exactly. So you can be consistent with that, and that's like really key. And it does make me think of Quake Duel. I think it's a really good example, because this expands out into kind of all games where you have something with like timing is another. It's exactly the same concept. It's like the numbers are there. You either have them or you don't. You have the ability, you have the information to time, and your sloppiness with that is completely down to your work off of the server. Like no one else is coming in between that. So the amount of players, myself included, that were lazy with this is pretty incredible, because as you say, you can with a month's hard work you can kind of address this, but it's not fun. It is hard work. It's not. It's actually painful. It's something that's equally there's lots of other areas like this too, that it kind of depends on how far you want to go and how seriously you want to take yourself as a competitor. And I think that's like always an interesting conversation too, because I feel like sometimes there's like a happy ignorance as to how much, like if you're ignorant of the work that you need to do, it's pretty easy. But if you want to be really honest with yourself, and that being honest with yourself is very important for this respect, there is just a million and one things that are like this that you can work on. And that for me is like why I love competition. It's why I like really respect players such as yourself. Or in Counter-Strike, I think one of the greatest examples of this in North America is Elige. I bring his name up constantly because he's just such a model citizen in terms of like really if he hears of an edge, doesn't matter how much work is between him and finding out more about that edge and how to incorporate it into his game, he will just go and do it, because that he wants to leave no stone unturned. And we have so many players at the top level that don't have this mindset. So again, goes back to your point of us really scratching the surface in terms of how much how the professional scene could look in the future once we kind of as you say, have a more supportive structure. Because right now it is really just left up to the person to keep themselves in check on their growth and development, and that's a lot to ask given how much there is at play. And I mean, you've been doing this for a long time now. I've been like obsessed and like reading about these ideas and thinking about them, and like for years as well. And we're just like, and it's taken us a long time to like grasp certain concepts, or to put them into practice, or to learn about them. And I'm constantly learning new things about performance. Just every year there's so many new things. We can't expect someone who's like 17 years old, who's very talented, to have that. It's like you were saying before, this system, the structure doesn't exist from the ground up as we need it to allow these players to be in a place where they can succeed better. And it is tragic, because I feel like I've seen so many teams and players fail just for the absence of having the right guidance, just for that absence. And so going back to performance and the individual, like you're talking about the things that you can do that are free, and I was just starting to touch on the fact that there's so many things that are out there that you can do. One of the things I think that is super valuable from what Tendler likes to talk about is like you having a performance range. And it's a super useful idea for many reasons because like one, it means that you can kind of divorce yourself from your own performance in certain respects because you can say, well, this is one data set. It's not representative of my performance as a whole. So if I'm having a bad time right now, but that's just that's the honest truth of what it is to be an athlete or a performer. I won't always have the same performance, and today I'm here, so in my range. And his idea is that, okay, if you understand how to identify your range, what does it look like in each different portion of your range, and you can place yourself within it, like that's the A, B, and C game idea. Am I in my A game, my B game, or my C game? Then I can have like protocols. I can better understand how to improve the areas I'm weak at, and maybe even to get more out of the areas I'm good at, or to make them better. So assessing your own performance in this way as a player, like understanding your strengths and weaknesses in this sense, what do you think about this idea? How do you do that? Like, what's that process like, do you think? Because I get that question quite a lot where people are like, I want to be goal oriented, but I don't know where to start. And this really is, if you understand this piece, then you will have an unlimited amount of goals to improve yourself.
Oh, that's a good question. That's probably why it's asked so much.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think you have to be realistic with yourself. You have to already kind of compare your skill in whatever you're playing to what you're looking to get to. So then you have to compare and contrast. Where am I at? What do I do that's just as good, maybe a little bit better than where I'm wanting to go? And what am I just absolutely failing at? So you find what you're absolutely failing at, and then you have to look at it like, okay, what is the easiest that I think I can transfer right now? What's the easiest goal that I can, fix, put into place? And you start to think and apply, just little certain exercises to get better at that, whether that's, actual exercises, like you say, like with aim training, or just finding your ways to put yourself in, like working on, let's say like a certain map in VALORANT. You're really bad at holding a certain site. So for the next week, you're like, okay, this is just the really bad portion that I'm bad at, so I'm going to force myself to learn it. I'm going to learn the ins and outs of this site. Why am I failing? And then come back with, okay, what have I learned in this week? What can I do? Et cetera, et cetera. And it's just all about learning what is obtainable at the time and what's not. And just making sure you're not overreaching and being too disheartened. You know what I mean? You got to set realistic goals for yourself. Like I didn't get as good as I was overnight. It didn't happen. Like I had a very strange like gaps of time growing up where I didn't get to play a lot, but I would improve and just like keep setting like smaller goals for myself for like the next opponent up the ladder that I need to beat, etc., or the next thing that I need to learn, blah blah blah. Like I think it's just being realistic with yourself. And that's why like so many people, like they get into certain games where it takes like high skill cap to be very, very good, and they're just overwhelmed by it. They're just overwhelmed by trying to do too much too fast. You need to start crawling, then walking, then running. It's just like life. Like there's not really going to be many games that you're just like instantly amazing at. That's just not going to happen. Like you'll have a good skill set that you can use, but then you need to learn what makes up the difference. Like just be honest with yourself. And then another thing that goes along with that, I think, that I think really needs to be adjusted going forward is that goes back to the coaching perspective, is that coaches need to understand the difference between your players and what type of practice brings out the most in each one. And a big example is Fatality, comparing us to. Fatality was somebody who he is a grinder. Like he needs to play 10 to 12 hours a day for however many days in a week that he needs, like leading up to tournaments, for him to get the most out of himself. If I did that, I would burn myself out. Like I would start playing and going through the motions too much. I would create bad habits for myself. I am someone who needs, I look at it like quality over quantity. That's how I get the most out of myself. So it's about setting up times for yourself to practice a decent amount, setting up time for you to review, which a lot of people are like, I don't want to review, blah, blah, blah. It takes up so much time. Well, the difference between playing and reviewing is you can speed up the review process. After you start to learn like what you're looking for and noticing things, you could watch demos at a faster rate. You can skip through the in-between time between all the games, between scrims and whatever. Like that process isn't as long as you make it out to be. And the more that you gain and improve from VOD review, the more fun it is. It's not as boring because you actually see and feel the improvement. At first, you look at it like something like you're studying and you don't ever want to study for that subject. But in reality, the only way that you're going to get better is putting in that work. So you need to set some practice, set some review time, and in my opinion, give yourself like your mind time to process it. I've always found when I like play and take like, even if it's like half a day or two, and then you come back, you feel fresh and like things are kicking in gear again. That's not to say you should take too much of a break, because I think you could probably attest to this. Let's say you've taken like 2+ weeks off of playing, and then you come back and you play Counter-Strike or you play Quake. The game feels much faster than it usually does, doesn't it? Like everything, like your eyes are seeing, and probably like, man, the speed of the game is so much quicker than it should be, and it takes time for your mind to like process it faster to where it feels slowed down. But yeah, you need to give yourself that time. Like you look at it like your perspective. You've been somebody who's worked out a lot in your life, like is really taking care of yourself. Do you work out every day, or do you give yourself a chance to rest?
Yeah, recovery is critical. Yeah.
It's the same for trying to improve your mind with gaming. You can't be going all the time. You can't be shoveling shit in your face in terms of food all the time. You need to be having a balanced schedule for yourself. If you don't give yourself time to rest and reflect and just, have other things that can take you away from the game, you won't improve the way that you should. At least that's how I've found has been the most successful for me. I view it like that. Like the mind is the same thing as your body with working out. You can't just go ham all the time. You have to have a nice system in place and give yourself some rest so that you can beef up, so to speak.
Yes, I do think it's kind of crazy the amount of analogies. I do think I think there are a lot of comparisons that are really good with like working out, like you said. I think I think I was recently talking about this, where like in strength training is supposed to be about, it's like strength is practice, and then there's like the raw ability, like the practice element is like your central nervous system. It knows what neurons and everything to fire off in like what muscle fibers and what order to what degree, and then it's that it has to learn how to do that, and then eventually then that's going to get better and better over time the more you do something. And similarly, like there's this other quality which is, okay, what is the raw potential there? You have to break down the muscle, but like force adaptations that create more muscle tissue, so you have more kind of raw work capacity. And it's like those two things. And it's like the thing is, the whole concept of like a deload week that is like very common and like necessary, is like scientifically is necessary at this point to perform for performers at the top level. It's this idea of recovery for your central nervous system, because you can kind of blow out, like you can burn out your central nervous system to the degree where it's like, doesn't matter how much raw strength you have, if your CNS is burnt out, well then it's just useless. It's like it's not going to operate properly. And I completely agree with you that it's like the same thing with your mind. And I think a lot of people have had that experience too, because obviously sleep is a big component here, whereby good quality sleep is you're doing so many, like from a technique perspective, like your mechanics and everything in your sleep, you do so many reps. And it's like sometimes like we've all experienced, I feel like, I'm just gonna make a generalization here, we've all experienced the fact that you'll be missing shots and like struggling with just your mechanics for a while, and then one day you'll wake up and it feels like fixed, like your sleep is eventually like it's doing all these repetitions of what you did throughout the day during the nighttime, and eventually that kind of like fine motor movement and stuff that just gets kind of fixed. So I think it's and that's actually obviously sleep, huge area. Like gamers, the most degenerate part of the populace, I think, like so with like the most degenerate hours. This is actually another thing we're talking about, coaching and standards there, like scrim times, in CS. Actually it took a while actually for people in CS. to start like changing like the scrim timings, because it was just like always so late at night, and it was kind of killing people. And I know they got to a general better standard there, but in lots of games, I know in Valorant that's not really the case yet. And I think it's partly because there's less LAN events, and I think with all of the travel that exists and like players being so in CS so attuned to like this idea of jet lag and how shitty it is, I think they got the sense of like, okay, if we're home and we're scrimming, we want it to be on better terms for our health. But this is a huge leak as well, I think, for a lot of people. And I mean, that feeling, like talking about awareness, that feeling of like mental fog when you're tired or jet lagged or something like that, it's really easy to think, I just have to like when I was younger, when I would experience that because of bad sleep, I would just be like, oh, I just have to play more. Like today, it's going to take me 4 hours to be fully warm today, as opposed to like, you know, what should be maybe like 15, 20 minutes really. So what has been like the biggest gains you've experienced in terms of tweaking some of the things outside of the game that impact your in-game performance?
I think rest is a big one. I mean, we could talk about jet lag. That'll be an easy one. One of the first international tournaments I had, ESWC Masters of Paris, I was completely jet lagged for that tournament. I had never dealt with it before, and it was rough.
Was that your first one?
That was my first travel across to Europe and play. Yeah.
I think that was my first one too. Yeah, I actually think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, because you qualified for the UK for that one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if I was in. I don't think I was in your group though. I think I was in CZM's group, but not your group.
Okay. Yeah. I think my group. What was my group? I think I remember. It was Avec, Fox, Matrox, Chance, and there was one more. I feel like there was a sixth, but I could be wrong.
How many groups were there? Was there just two?
It was a lot, actually.
There's more than because I remember 04 was at that tournament too, and Fuki was at that tournament. I think he was in my group actually.
There were a lot of players at that tournament. I want to say like I think there were 20 plus, and they did something like 4 groups of 5 or did like 6 groups of or something. There was just a lot at the beginning and before they like cut it down for the playoffs. But yeah, like that, trying to experience that and like playing at your best. So if I were to go back to my younger self now, I would, advise myself to try to get through that and to survive the first day. Is you have to drink more water. You have to keep yourself hydrated to get through. Like, you think you want caffeine, but if you're not intaking enough water, it just makes it worse.
Yeah.
So drinking more water, eating well, and like the biggest thing to deal with jet lag is to eat it. I found the fastest way to get over it, instead of being like 3 to 5 days and trying to cut it down to like 1.5 to 2, is to forcing yourself to eat at the proper breakfast, lunch, dinner times. No matter, even if you're not hungry, force yourself to eat, and your body will adjust quicker. Yeah. And then don't practice as much. Like you're saying, you don't need that much practice like to get ready before your game, especially since you're tired. You don't want to wear yourself out. You would want to just practice enough to get a feel for the LAN, like the game, and then just keep yourself fresh and ready for as long as possible, because you have to take into consideration when you're jet lagged, you're not going to be able to play as long at your highest level as normal. So you have to adjust accordingly. Like you said, you're going to be on your C game. So how do you try to win with your C game instead of playing with your B or A plus game? I
love that idea, by the way. You can actually be okay with it. Like, because that's like the biggest thing. If you struggle too much and like it makes it worse, you gotta like accept that this is how it is.
Yeah, acceptance. Because if you don't accept it, you'll just get frustrated, and usually that type of frustration you can't kind of channel into focus for the game. More so like the difference is like if you just get, I've noticed I've been able to find a way where if I get upset with something somebody else does in the game, I could somehow channel it into how do I get this back as fast as possible? Like how do I problem solve, and just channel that anger into focus rather than allowing it to cloud my judgment and just
the injustice. Yes, so unfair.
Exactly.
Like
what gives him the right?
Yeah. Injustice. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that is like I like the idea of like having that anchor of like the problem solving, like channeling it back through to that, because that is always that's what you're doing when you're not angry, is you're like, if like everything's fine and there's like nothing throwing you off, it's kind of what you're doing. So it's like having that kind of anchoring thoughts is really important, because you also said something before which is similar about believing in yourself. And it's funny because people will say, oh, just believe in yourself, and it's like, well, shit, what good does that do me? Because most people will not really understand what does that mean really, like what is it, because what you I think framed quite well when you said that is that you identify what giving up on yourself looks like, and you identified what believing in yourself looks like, and believing in yourself is give yourself a chance to problem solve. So every time there's a problem, it's like, let's try to solve this, as opposed to getting frustrated, because that's what it looks like when you start giving up on yourself. So I like how what you've done here is you've got these key ideas and you have actionable protocols behind them to actually keep yourself in the right place to keep performing really well. And I think that's the thing, is like trying to distill some of these more nebulous ideas. And because the thing is too is that there's lots of like savant players who are like let's say Zyru from Counter-Strike, who is this, it's, I don't know if
I've seen some highlights. The guy's opping is insane.
He was born on the day Counter-Strike was released, by the way, and like he's legitimately like the best player in the world, except maybe Simple. And it's like, but he's one of those players who he just was born to play that game, because he just gets it. Like every hour that he puts into the game, it must seemingly be perfect the way that he's spending it, because his decision making, everything else is so good. But there are players like that, and you would not be able to have an interview with Zyru and for him to be able to really explain literally anything about how that works and how he is so good as he is, because he's just not barely human. I don't, but so I think it's really valuable when you're like being able to like communicate these ideas. I think it further kind of proves that, or validates the point that you do really well, like doing work as talent or doing work as a coach. And it also, I think, shows that, because to my estimation, I don't really hear people talking about these ideas in this way, so that there is this huge kind of gap, and I think hunger for all these competitors out there that are trying to like put a structure in without, as you say, the assistance that they would want to have. So I think these discussions are super valuable in that sense. And kind of going into the next area here, obviously I think I would be remiss if I didn't kind of talk to you about some of the more nuanced elements of something that's so special, which is like being a champion. Like there's lots of competitors and pro players out there, but none that have the accolades that you have in terms of the amount of championships you've won, your consistency. And there's this one idea here which I think is really core, which is the difference between chasing the number one and being the best. So the difference between innovating as the best person and trying to keep people off of your back versus just trying to like copy what that innovator's doing and catching up as quickly as possible. And because we see, as an example, to frame this, you'll see a lot of teams that will do a really good job of catching up, or maybe the person who's in the best spot maybe has a bad tournament and then they lose, and you have a new champion, but that champion is not the next champion as well.
It doesn't last.
They don't know how to like do that switch, that philosophical switch. So can you like speak to that, because you've been chased for a very long time and you've managed to like stay ahead of the pack, generally speaking, across like a very long period of time. So how do you feel about this idea?
It's definitely different. I think there's a different hunger when you're going for a championship the first time and when you're trying to repeat. There's a different set of pressure, as well as like you kind of have to filter out in your mind say like certain doubts. Like everybody is going to have it. Like I'm different from nobody else. Like I'm gonna have the same thoughts. Like if I'm trying to repeat on a tournament, like the added pressure of trying to win again. What's at stake? Like what it would look like if I would lose, etc. Blah blah blah. But you have to just center yourself towards it. Be very focused on the goal ahead. And I think the biggest thing is humility. And the hardest thing in gaming and competing in life is this balance of confidence to where you're not cocky, and how do I put this? And having humility and respect for your opponents to the utmost level, but not to the point where you fear them. It is such a hard balance to stay within that. But that's what you have to do. Like, you have to like, you've been there before, right? So I look at it like the players that are trying to beat me, I've been there before. I know what it's like to try to chase after, somebody who's won championships time and time again and what it's going to take. So I try to put myself like, I know the work that I need to do to achieve that again. And if I just lax for any bit, like I just like, I don't need to work that hard. I don't need to, think that they're going to be able to do it, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to game plan for them as hard, whatever. They haven't caught up. That's when you set yourself up for failure. It doesn't mean that you have to like I said before with practice, it doesn't mean that you have to go all out and practice all the time, like to maintain that. It just means you need to, be realistic with what's at stake. You need to stay hungry for it. So even if there's not goals that are within your reach anymore in terms of, let's say, like you've won championships, right? Let's say you've won 3 and I've won 2 and now I'm trying to match you. At some point, you have to be like, you know what? I need to chase my own ghost, so to speak. I need to like set something that somebody else hasn't done. And that's what I'm going for. I'm not going for what everybody else is talking about. I'm going for that. And as long as you keep your mind on the prize, like it really, really helps. And I think as well as being honest from tournament to tournament, the progression of players and understanding, because there are times where like I've won tournaments and I haven't played at my best. And then there's been tournaments I've won where I've felt almost unbeatable. But the thing is, there are other times where it's going to be that way for somebody else. And so if you aren't preparing yourself in game planning to beat them or a team, etc., when they're playing at their best and kind of understanding and getting a feel for their momentum, like how they're playing on the day, you're just setting yourself up for them to win the championship instead. It's all about staying diligent in terms of practice preparation and just mindfulness in the present moment and not thinking too far ahead and not being too scared of what's about to happen. Like you just got to go for it. You got to put everything out there, not be afraid to fail. Like you just have to.
It's really interesting, like the balance that you're striking, that duality. That is, I mean, this is always, I think this is one of the most, at the same time, most beautiful but most frustrating elements to being a competitor is so many of the kind of yin yang elements that you have to kind of balance, where like it's the idea of like allowing your subconscious to kind of just do its thing, but at the same time you have to have the conscious element to everything you're doing as well. You have to be goal oriented. You have to be able to have the awareness, the conscious awareness, whilst you also have the capability to, as you say, like not be also shaken off balance, because there is this balance that exists where you are in your peak performance, or your optimal performance, and that's what being a great opponent is also about. Like I think you said it quite early on, it's about I forget the way that you put it, but basically that you put it, how did you describe it? But basically this idea that when you're in a competition, it's about throwing off your opponent. And it doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't necessarily mean being aggressive, which is what you said. And sometimes not throwing off your opponent is by just not giving them what they need to play their best within their strategy, and like recognizing that. And sometimes like if you're against like a player that wants to take lots of fights, it's like even if you think you can win a lot of the fights and have better positions, it's like what about just not giving them the fights? You put them in a place where they're uncomfortable. And this is the entire point, is like forcing that lack of comfort for your opponent. And this idea, I think so many people are familiar with it, where you lose confidence, or like, and this is actually, okay, this should be the next topic, because talking about confidence, because there's this idea that when you're losing, sometimes there are like things, especially in a team game, that are kind of out of your control. Sometimes like in a tactical FPS especially, sometimes you just don't get action. And for some players that affects them more than others, because they almost need that validation of having some action, getting their success, hitting their shots to kind of keep them in a place where they can kind of validate themselves that, okay, I'm feeling good, I'm performing well right now. And then, but sometimes you'll be in spots where you either, because you're getting dominated on the gunfights for whatever reason, but that's like the reality. And now you start to like lose confidence, and it's like this poker thing that starts to happen, where it's like I'm losing money, and like my subconscious inclination when I lose money is to now be more risk averse. And being risk averse is obviously not the strategy. and the like if you start to deviate from that strategy, now you're making decision-making errors on top of the fact that you're not confident in the gunfights at the same time. So you're starting to spiral out of control, and you're plummeting deep into the C game. So it's like, how do you bring yourself back from those moments where you feel like you're not hitting your shots, and like is it just a confidence thing? How much are you messing with yourself there, and is it just a numbers game because sometimes you don't get as much action? So it's like there's these elements that I think are really hard for some players to manage, and you'll see some players kind of fall off a cliff when presented in these scenarios. So talking about confidence and remaining confident even when things are against you, how does that work?
It comes down to everybody. You just have to accept everybody's going to have an off day, an off game at some point, and that's something that 04 really drilled into my head, that the best that you think that you've played in practice, what you think your best skill is not what you will be playing at during the tournament. Like, you're going to be on a brand new setup. You're going to be dealing with nerves and pressure. Like, it's totally different playing in practice compared to playing for thousands and thousands of dollars on the line. Like, it's night and day difference. So, and having to deal with that and be more mindful of it and managing it and playing, you're not going to be playing at your best. So if you go into it with a good mindset of, how do I win with, like playing an average game, you get to kind of like get a feel for what you're doing on the day. So whether that's for, Quake or whatever other game, you can apply it to anything. So you go into it with, your game plan there, where you're pressing, but you're reading and reacting. You're not really going with the decisions of playing at your absolute best where you're all inning with certain decisions. You're feeling it out. You have to. And the more that you feel it out and get a balance and an understanding of how their game is affecting your performance via, are they taking certain fights away from you that you would like to have? Are you just not hitting as well today with certain weapons, certain situations? Then you have to accept that. Like, the more that you fight against what's happening in the moment and don't adapt to it, the worse it's, like you said, it's just going to start spiraling down. You can't get in this delusional state. You have to just be like, okay, this is my life right now. This is what's happening. I wish it was better, but it's not. How do I make the most of it now? So that could mean, like, I've had tournaments where, I'm playing a specific player, and they're usually known for being very good with a certain weapon or two, and they're kind of weak with, let's say, rockets, for example. But for some reason on that day, they're playing really well and their rocket placement is really good. So if I keep hitting my head against the wall and keep going with that same plan, it's going to fail. I have to adjust to it. I have to start realizing that I need to be adaptable and I just need to change my game. That's a humility thing. You have to be like, okay, I'm not right every time. So how do I get back to being right? You know what I'm saying? Then just adjust and adapt. And it comes down to just believing that no matter what is going on, you can problem solve to do your best and to try to win. Like, and if you don't, you're just failing yourself. So, and I think that's a big thing, like in team games too, when we've had team modes and I see that a certain player isn't necessarily gotten like the best stats wise during the game, I've thought back to, like, let's say the game is ending or the round's ending, and I think back to like an important decision that they made, or because they held a position, even though nothing happened, they didn't fight, just the fear of them being there and doing their job led everybody else to winning. I always like have positive reinforcement for it, because it is a thing with a lot of people. If they don't feel like they're part of the action enough, sometimes they don't feel like what they're doing is of consequence. But sometimes doing as little as possible is your job. And if you're doing it right, it helps everybody else. So especially when it comes to team game stuff, it's about lifting each other up, because there's games where I'm going to carry the shit out of everybody. And then there's games where I'm not, and I need your help. Like, I need you to be the one, and I'm just doing everything in my power to assist you. It's always going to be an ebb and flow of that within team games. And I think that's one thing, like, noticing across the years. I had a buddy who actually grew up in the same town as me. He was like just below the pro level for Counter-Strike. He almost made it into the CGS for Counter-Strike Source.
Right, yeah.
He goes by Fresco. And we've talked about, esports and stuff for years. And he said a big problem with Counter-Strike is you'd see a team and they think that instead of fixing the team portion, they just need this player. If this player is replaced with this player, it'll make the world a difference. They'll get the frags that they need, etc.
Yep.
When in reality, the reason that he's getting all those kills is because of the way the team dynamic is set up, and they're setting him up for success. And when he comes into the team, it's totally dysfunct. They're not on the same page, and they're not getting the results that they want or expected right away. It just doesn't... It rarely ever works like that you can just plug one person in and immediately it's all better. And then even on top of that, usually when you see that happen, it only lasts for a very short period.
Yes.
And then once difficulties start to happen, what's the same thing? They start complaining about each other. They don't fix the problems as a whole. And it all comes down to, just believing in yourself, adapting, and working, whether it's by yourself for a solo game or working with your team to understand just the ebbs and flows of tournament play. It's not always going to be your day, but just do what you can to make sure that you set up everybody else up for success.
Okay. Well, the natural conclusion of this podcast, although we're not done yet, is that we should start a Valorant team. I think we can do a good job. But I think there's a lot of really great points there, and I think one that I want to quickly make a comment on is the idea of it's so interesting with the confidence thing as well, because sometimes the players will be in a spot whereby I make this mistake all the time, and now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like I really need to get this in check. But it's that situation where, because you feel as though you're kind of dominated, you start making mistakes because you think you need the confidence, so you try to fake it till you make it type of thing. So instead of doing what you said, where you kind of have the humility and awareness to just adjust to the situation and say, okay, I need to actually play a little bit slower or more conservative, or play these types of positions. It's no, I need to win a gunfight, because I'm not winning my gunfights where I'm losing these aim battles. I'm letting them dominate me in the aim battles. I don't want to lose that kind of confidence battle. I need to and then you force a situation that should never have been created in the first place. It's a mistake, and it never goes really all too well. And these kinds of I think this idea that you're talking about of the awareness, it always comes back to that, because it's so easy to just to play overly emotionally or give too much. It's being led by the emotions, as opposed to just seeing them as signals, which I think is two very different things. So I really like that you brought that up. And there's the next topic actually. I'm going to pull out a quote on my phone, because I just realized there's a particular quote that I really like, and it's I actually put it in an article that I wrote not too long ago. And this article was basically about this idea. It's another kind of fundamental question that comes up a lot with performances for players. Is that, okay, I'm really amazing, the kind of scrim bucks stuff, amazing in a scrim, but when I try to go into the actual live environment, it's really difficult. And there's this quote, so I've got it here, and this is from Tendler's last book, and I was like, this is a really cool idea. It's about this concept, and it goes, this common error in learning happens in many performance arenas. The golfer who doesn't play as well in a tournament as in the practice round, or the new actor who kills it in a rehearsal but can't deliver on the stage. As many golfers and actors, if you believe the sim and the live market are the same, there's a fundamental flaw in your understanding of performance. And making the same trades, it should be no different, is a common refrain that highlights this flaw. While the trades may be the same, you are not. So this kind of idea that there's so many different things going on in the live environment that it's it's a totally different thing. Is this something that you have thought about, or that you have noticed? Because let's face it, there's so many players or teams that base a lot of expectations off of scrim performances, which is obviously you're setting yourself up for bad things usually.
This is a funny subject, because I've had players or teams message me before in the past for various, let's say Overwatch or Shootmania, and there came a point where certain teams were and it just shows such a difference in mindset and proper preparation, because it would get to the point where we would play so different in matches, because matches are different. That's where it should be the culmination of all the knowledge you have and trying to get the best out of all of it right there and adapting. And certain teams or players would message me like, why do you play like you do? You play so different in matches compared to practice. We just don't want to practice against you anymore. Because then when they meet you in the tournament, you don't play the same way. They have these preset, conceptions about what you're going to do and aren't respecting your ability as a player to go beyond what you've done and to adapt and to adjust. That just highlights it right there. It's totally different from practice to real life. Like, practice is all... Oh, did I just turn it off? Am I good?
I think you're good.
You good? Okay.
Yeah, you're good.
It's all about getting the most out of practice, finding little limits here or there. I don't think you should push yourself to limits that are just like a waste of time for both players or both teams. But you should be trying little things out, little goals here or there, and then getting that feedback and then coming back to it in real time and doing your best to improve yourself. It's like you want who you are come match time to be better than who you were the last 2 weeks of practice. That's what everybody should be doing. Literally right before a flight, before a tournament, I'm thinking about, okay, what are the idiosyncrasies in my game and my playing shape right now? What do I think are the biggest threats in terms of players? What do I think I should game plan and do against them? Okay. Then you try to have game plans set up for that. And then, especially with Quake Champions, I've had to think about, okay, what if somebody has been practicing off stream? I need to kind of be ready to draft differently, or be ready if they're good with this champion now, which they weren't before. How do I want to counteract that, things like that. Whereas people just kind of, most of the time, they want to just kind of coast it in. You can't. You always have to be like on the edge of your seat and ready to adjust your game. And I think that's the biggest difference between successful teams and successful players.
It's definitely an interesting one, because it again, as you say, like in a team environment too, it comes down so much to how the kind of upper parts of the leadership kind of really help kind of direct the growth of a team and set the expectations too. Because I think this is like another aspect to it as well, is the mental game of, because we talked about it before, like there are certain players on your team that they're there for specific talents and roles, and you're not necessarily expecting them to be the most complete player possible. That's like really not necessarily usually how it's ever going to work. So I also wonder, like, if proper expectations are set in terms of how you manage a team in these regards, setting them up in the way to like look at things in the best way, understanding the difference between a scrim and a live match, and some of the considerations in a live match and protocols that will help you to adjust, as opposed to just saying, we do all this practice, we've got our anti-strats, we're going to do this going into the game. But again, there might be little concern for how the actual live scenario could differ, and setting up and giving the tools to the players to be able to cope in the best way. When you're like looking at the professional scene, and you're thinking like, and let's say a game like Valorant, I think Valorant is probably going to eclipse, I think, most esports going forward, just the way that their approach is. It seems like it's going to keep growing and growing and growing. Like in that game, I see at this point, like, it's very underdeveloped, and like comparatively speaking with CS, and CS itself has a huge amount of issues in terms of good quality coaches as well. Like it's just a very hard job to do really well. So do you think that if you stepped into, like, you've had your 6 to 12 months of time, like prepping your knowledge and everything else like that, do you feel like you would be able to kind of jump into leading a team, or do you think that leading a team in a specific game itself is going to require a lot of experience to do very well? Or would you feel like you could kind of plug and play with teams, just with what you have right now, possibly, for those games?
For my situation, I think because I don't have the CS background that a lot of the other players have, it wouldn't be something where I could just fully lead right away. I think it would be something where I could be, let's say, like a co-leader, like the backup plan guy, because that's what I noticed with Overwatch. Like the best, when we started playing our best right before we stopped, like we disbanded after, what was it, Contenders Season 0 or whatever, when Liquid decided that they didn't want to invest in the Overwatch League type thing. We were getting really good because I was at that time, my responsibility was keeping track of not only our alts, all of the other team's alts, constantly feeding that information to everybody. And if I had a plan, I would initiate it. If I didn't, though, I'm not going to be able to come up with that plan all the time. I'm not perfect. But it's about having one or two other people that can see things a little bit differently than you, and they can help you. They can help you come up with a different plan. You're not going to be able to sense and feel everything that everybody's experiencing within the game. You can only get so much. So sometimes you have to just rely and trust that, okay, what they're feeling, what I can't see, what they're experiencing, we need to go with what their plan is right now. That is the call. The call is to, go with plan B with whatever they're doing, and we'll go with it and then adapt from there. And it's much better to do that than to have one person, just one, talking, and then eventually they like kind of freeze up. They don't know what to do, and you don't have a backup plan in place. You don't have somebody that can at least like try to think differently and have something else in place. And then you see teams like morale start to drop because they don't have any direction. Like they're not keeping their emotional state up. They're not just constantly keeping them in like, we've got this. Let's just keep, talking about what they're doing. How can we adapt? What are we able to do now? Okay, let's go with that. And then once you start saying, okay, they're not doing this well, then you start to press on that and you start to, get back into the game. But if people aren't doing that, it gets really, really difficult. It does. Like when it's all down to just one person, it can be.
Yeah, and you were talking about the emotional management there, and I think that's another interesting area that I've seen people struggle with thinking about, because again, for me, it was quite the thing I subscribe to currently, which I think is the best way to think about it, is like the stuff that Tendler writes about emotions. I think he's done a great job, just that they're signals, and it's like but the other kind of school of thought is like, well, emotions will throw you off of your game, so you kind of have to either mute them or be able to kind of find ways to quiet them. So what is your relationship to emotions for performance? Is it something that you want to mute them, or do you want to use them, or are they like, how do you think about emotions in your game? I
mean, the most common emotion that people are going to feel is probably anger, because you have an expectation of yourself and you failed to meet it. And so you're angry about that. And that's where, we talked about earlier, do you allow your anger to cloud your judgment and you dwell in it? Or what I've tried to do is refocus the anger, like use it to kind of like get yourself even more into the game to get back at that guy. Not gambling right away to get back, but to put yourself in the game 110%. Make sure that you're fully invested so that you're not giving them an inch. So that you're always putting out your best, like trying to do that and make sure that you're within the moment. I think that's probably the best thing that people can try to like work on in general. It's the one that everybody will run into. But yeah, the rest of them, it's just, I think you have to kind of put a lot of them down. You have to like stuff them inside, like doubt. You have to really crush your doubt inside and play within the realms of realism within your like perceived skill of yourself, and trust that if you're making the right decisions, you're in the right positions, and you're making the right reads, and it's the right percentage plays to make, then you need to go with it. And not getting upset and doubtful when somebody has beat you one time on like a 10 or 20% chance of beating you in that situation, and then doubting that if you go to it again that you'll lose. Like the odds of that happening are so low, but if you start doubting yourself and hesitating in your plays, then it just adds even more to what the enemy is doing. So yeah, I've just always looked at it like I'd rather the good philosophy is, would you rather lose or be beat? And I would rather be beat by somebody. I would rather be beat knowing that I gave it my all and they played amazing to win. Whereas if I lost, it's because I wasn't focusing enough. I allowed myself to get too emotional. I just made super stupid mistakes because of greed or this or that, where it's like, no, I want them to earn every inch that they get within the game. Every inch. I want to make sure that you know, if I'm being beat, they deserve to win. You know, it doesn't come down to, you know, just stupid shit that I've done or luck or whatever. No, it's because they're really good and they deserve to be the winner that day.
And it's, I guess, like an extra additional supportive statement to that is, if you, because I struggled with this a lot, where it's like I start to like have issues where I get thrown off so much, either by the opponent or myself. I start to kind of give up on myself, and I kind of just, yeah, I throw in the towel, and I don't consciously realize that I'm doing that, but I'm like pulling off the gas because I'm almost like too afraid to have lost or like to be beat by giving everything.
Yes.
I'm like afraid of that, because then that I had to face the reality that I wasn't good enough. And that's actually like that was always a difficult one for me. And I bet there's lots of people that go through that. But at the same time, like the logical kind of rebuttal, I would say, is that if you do that, you have to do everything you can to resist falling into that, because if you do it, you don't like the data that you get from that game is then useless. Like you because you weren't giving it your all. You didn't even know
exactly.
what your like what is. You're not competing anymore.
That's why every time that I practice, I'm 100% in it. If I can tell that I'm like starting to go through the motions or getting like too tired, or like, let's say maybe the opponent's, you know, on a certain day, I've played my limit to where they're not tough enough to keep me like in that mental state, then I just need to just call it. Like, not necessarily like not be rude in the middle of the game. Finish what I need to finish, don't play anymore. Like, everything has to matter. Like, when you're trying to get better and you're trying to get up there, every time that you tilt in a game and you just kind of like, you feed kills, you quit games early, that's just opportunities that you've wasted for yourself to improve. Like, if they're beating you, there's a reason. You should use it to figure it out. Like, like I said before, it's okay to fail as long as you're trying your best. It's all right. Because if you don't, you're not going to improve the way that you should. You're just not. That's just wasted potential data for yourself.
Yes, and I think it's one of the most beautiful things about competition to me is like it's this sense that firstly, competition is a complete meritocracy. There's like no hiding that you put work in, there's a result that comes out of it, and you're in complete control of that, and nothing can mess with it. That sense of achievement is so beautiful because you work for every inch, and the poetry for me is that in this endeavor of like self-improvement in this way of pushing yourself consistently to new levels and passing new obstacles and boundaries, is that the opponent who's in the arena with you is effectively your greatest friend, because they're a mirror of your weaknesses, especially if they beat you. So they are the conduit, the kind of the path to your growth is that person that's beating you. And so if you actually like shut off that pathway because it's like you're saying, you're not being beaten but you're losing to yourself, then you've cut off that road to growth. And it's like you're ruining the poetry of the moment by doing that. And I've done that with myself a lot. So for me, I think that's like a pretty good place to leave things. We've been talking for a while, but I want to give you the opportunity. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think I'd love to like talk about this a little bit in terms of all the topics that we've covered that we've missed?
I mean, we've talked about a lot today.
We've covered quite a lot. Yeah, we've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. So not too much, man. I'm just kind of excited to see where, coaching, proper practice regiments for teams goes for in the future. And like, because right now I think there are a few teams that do it right. Not everybody has the same ability to have like the right amount of coaches, or let's say like, I think right now Team Liquid is doing it, not just because I'm sponsored by them, but just seeing their difference from other teams. Yeah. They're doing things right. Like, whenever you're at their training facilities, they have like, they have chefs that are making sure that you're eating healthy every single day. I mean, it's up to you to eat it, but I mean, for the most part, it's good for you. It helps you make sure that your mind and your body is right. So they have that going. Then, like you said, I can't remember his name, but the sports psychologist that does deal with a few, or has dealt with a few of the teams for them, getting somebody in there to help give the right direction. And it's like, it's not as though the players wouldn't necessarily reach it there themselves. It just expedites the process. And that's what you want to do. Like,
we're all competing to win championships. That's what we're doing. Like once you get to a certain level of skill, it's not about did I finish top 8? Did I finish top 16? At some point, once you've hit a certain benchmark, it's not about that anymore. And whenever you don't win, it is like the worst feeling in the pit of your stomach, because you feel like you've left something on the table, that it was your fault. Like it was within your grasp and you didn't take it, you know? And I think just the farther that we go on, and like I said, with like we talked about before, you know, venture capital being more of a thing within, you know, different organizations or whatever. I think once with the money that's in there, like some teams will start to realize, look, we can't just let things just be in chaos. We can't just expect, you know, results from everybody doing whatever they want. It's going to come down to a good balance of structure, and then the biggest gap is how do you bring the most out of each player? Like a big example, like look at let's go back to the Bulls documentary. You could not expect the same practice and everything out of Dennis Rodman as you could everybody else. But if you treated him the way that he needed to be to get the most out of him, he brought the best that's around in terms of defense and rebounding. He was what they needed. But if you treated him and you know, burnt him out, you wouldn't get that same level. Like some players need, you know, let's say like a fire lit under their ass, you know, so to speak, like a coach that actually is like on them. Others, you don't need that. You need to like give them a little space to think about things, approach them individually. And so once teams get better at understanding how to get good scheduled practice that brings out the most out of players that need to play more and players that need to play less, it's going to be a really exciting time.
And you know, with that said, as you know, closing thoughts here, what do you think is? Oh no, it's escaping my mind. So the worst possible time, like right at the end. What was it going to be? It was. You know what? Maybe it's just not meant to be. If it was truly important,
it's for another time.
It's oh right, of course. This makes sense. This is important. So you kind of alluded to kind of some of your possible career paths in the future and what you might be doing. But is there anything in the more immediate future that you know, people can you know, like, are you thinking about making any content? I know that you do a lot of streaming and stuff. Like, where can people find you more?
No, actually, I've been notorious for not creating YouTube content, but it's actually something that I want to put in motion this year, especially since I have a little more time before the league starts up next year. Is I'm gonna start doing like a VOD review analysis of every game that I've played throughout the Pro League and try to like break it down based off of metas, things like that, and then try to show improvements from the beginning of it even towards, you know, the end, that type of thing. So I want to start doing that type of content, and then from there, I think it'll take a little bit, but I want to come up with some like very standard, teachable, just very short things where just fundamentals of how to get the most out of your game and decision making from FPS to FPS. And then as well, like hopefully just, you know, letting everybody know you don't need the very best, like most expensive mouse, most expensive, you know, keyboard, etc. You need to find a way what's right for you and to try to give an example of how to find that for yourself. And because I still feel so sorry for people playing with 60 hertz monitors and they don't realize the difference that it makes in their play, or you know, maybe like for their hand size, they're playing with a mouse they think is fine, but in reality, they should play with something else. Yeah. Like a good example for me with that, I actually can't play with ambidextrous mice anymore. For some, like, that is something that age is hitting me with, to where it actually hurts my wrist a lot to play with a mouse like that. I have to play with an ergonomic shaped mice anymore, where I played with a WMO for years, but I can't play like that anymore. So trying to help just a simple guide for people to find what feels comfortable for them and brings out the most in their play, I think something I want to do within the next year.
Awesome. Well, I'm very excited for all of that. I'm sure a lot of people will be very excited to hear that. Thank you for spending the time and sitting down and just talking through all of these topics with me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It was nice to be here, Dan.